Jake Morrison rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the communication console again. The green lights blinked in their usual pattern, showing all systems working properly. Another quiet night on Kepler Station, humanity's newest outpost floating, in the empty space between star systems. Most nights were like this, boring, peaceful, and very lonely. Jake had been working the night shift for 6 months now. He was one of 12 humans stationed on this small metal box they called home, floating millions of miles from Earth. The station existed to help humans talk with alien species and maybe make some friends in the galaxy. So far, they had made a few contacts, but nothing exciting ever happened. That changed at exactly 2:17 in the morning station time. A sound burst through Jake's headphones that made him jump out of his chair. It was not the usual calm beeping of normal space traffic. This was a desperate, frightening scream for help that cut through the static like a knife through paper. Jake's fingers moved quickly over his controls, trying to clear up the signal. The voice that came through was high-pitched and alien, speaking in the musical language of the Zephyrians. Jake had studied their language for 2 years, but this speaker was talking so fast and with such fear that he could barely understand. "Help us," the voice said, crackling through space static. "The machines have come, they eat everything, 3 continents are gone, 12 million of our people. Please, someone help us. The harvesters are awake." Jake felt his blood turn cold. He had heard stories about the harvesters from other alien species, old legends about mechanical monsters that slept in dead space for thousands of years. Most people thought they were just scary stories told to children. But this voice sounded real, and it sounded terrified. He recorded the message and ran to wake up Commander Lisa Carter. Lisa was a tough woman in her 40s who had served in Earth's Space Navy for 20 years. She could stay calm in any crisis, which was why they put her in charge of the station. "Commander," Jake said, shaking her shoulder gently. "You need to hear this right now." Lisa sat up quickly, instantly awake. Good commanders learned to do that. "What is it, Morrison?" Jake played the message. As the alien voice filled Lisa's small cabin, he watched her face change from sleepy confusion to sharp attention to something that looked like fear. "Nexus Prime," she said quietly. "That's one of the Zephyrian colony worlds. 12 million people." "The message keeps repeating," Jake told her. "But it's getting weaker. I think their transmitter is failing." Lisa was already putting on her uniform. "Wake up the communication team. I want this message cleaned up and translated properly, then send it out on all galactic frequencies. Every species in the Galactic Council needs to hear this." "You think it's real?" Jake asked. "The harvesters, I mean." Lisa stopped putting on her boots and looked at him seriously. "Son, in 20 years of space service, I've learned one thing. When someone screams for help like that, you don't ask if they're telling the truth. You ask how fast you can get there." Within an hour, Kepler Station was buzzing with activity. The entire crew was awake, working to boost their communication. Array and send the Zephyrian distress call across known space. The message went out to dozens of worlds and hundreds of ships belonging to the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The Altarians had technology that could bend space and time like folding paper. Their ships could appear anywhere in the galaxy, within hours. The Vegan Collective controlled energy weapons that could destroy moons with a single shot. Their crystal cities floated in space like living jewels. The Cetacean Empire grew ships from living coral that could heal themselves and evolve during battle. Any of these species had the power to help Nexus Prime. All Jake and Lisa had to do was wait for someone to answer. But hours passed, and the galaxy stayed silent. Jake monitored every frequency, listening for any sign that the great powers were mobilizing to help. Instead, he started picking up encrypted messages between alien governments. As he decoded them, his heart sank further with each transmission. Nexus Prime Sector declared contaminated. Read one message from the Altarian High Command. All ships ordered to maintain safe distance. Harvester presence confirmed. The Vegan Collective was even more direct. Nexus Prime written off as total loss. Establishing quarantine zone. No rescue attempts authorized. The Cetacean Empire's message was the worst. Ancient protocols activated. If harvesters are truly awakened, containment is only option. Nexus Prime must be sacrificed to save the galaxy. Jake stared at his screen, not believing what he was reading. 12 million innocent people were dying, and the galaxy's most powerful civilizations were just going to let it happen. They were going to draw lines on star maps and hope the monsters stayed on the other side. He found Commander Carter in the station's small meeting room, staring at a tactical display that showed the Nexus Prime system. The display updated every few minutes with data from long-range sensors. Each update showed more of the planet covered in strange geometric patterns. "They're not coming," Jake said quietly. "No," Lisa replied. "They're not." "So what do we do?" Lisa was quiet for a long time, studying the display. Jake could see her thinking, weighing options that all seemed impossible. Finally, she touched her communication device. "This is Commander Carter to all department heads. Report to the meeting room immediately." Within minutes, the senior staff was gathered around the table. Chief Engineer Tony Walsh, a big man with grease always under his fingernails. Medical Officer Dr. Amy Chen, who had volunteered for the assignment because she wanted to help alien species. Security Chief Ben Rodriguez, whose family had been soldiers for 4 generations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lisa said, "we have a problem. 12 million Zephyrians are about to die, and nobody in the galaxy is going to help them." She explained the situation quickly and clearly. The great civilizations had all decided that Nexus Prime was too dangerous to save. They would rather sacrifice one world than risk their fleets against an enemy they didn't understand. "What about us?" asked Dr. Chen. "What can we do?" Lisa pulled up another display showing the human ships currently docked at Kepler Station. 12 vessels total, ranging from the military escort ship UES Defiance to small cargo transports. None of them were designed for combat against ancient mechanical nightmares. "We can try," Lisa said simply. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what she was suggesting. The human fleet was tiny compared to alien armadas. Their weapons were primitive compared to alien technology. They had maybe 2,000 people total, including civilians. "Commander," said Security. Chief Rodriguez carefully, "With respect, that sounds like suicide." Lisa nodded. "Probably, but those are 12 million people dying while the galaxy watches. Someone has to try. The Altarians have ships that can travel faster than light instantly," Engineer Walsh pointed out. "The Vegans have weapons that can crack planets. What can we do that they can't?" "We can show up," Lisa replied. "Sometimes that's all that matters." She stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, people were dying while the galaxy's great powers calculated risks and decided those lives weren't worth saving. "I know it's crazy," Lisa continued. "I know our ships are small and our weapons are weak, but we're here and we're human, and humans don't leave people behind. Not if we can help it." Jake watched the faces around the table. He saw fear, yes, but also something else. Determination. The same stubborn refusal to give up that had carried humans from caves to the stars. "All in favor?" Lisa asked. Every hand went up. "Then let's go save some people," Commander Carter said. "Jake, send a message to Nexus Prime on all frequencies. Tell them help is coming." "What should I say?" Jake asked. Lisa smiled grimly. "Tell them the cavalry is on the way. They might not know what that means, but they'll figure it out when we get there." As alarms began sounding throughout the station and crews rushed to prepare the ships, Jake sent the message across space to a dying world. It was a small message from a small species with small ships and big hearts, but sometimes, he thought, that was enough. The 12 human ships moved through space like angry wasps leaving their nest. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars streak past as they pushed their engines harder than safety manuals recommended. Behind him, his crew worked at stations that glowed red with warning lights. "Captain," called Chief Engineer Tony Walsh through the communication system. "I'm reading stress fractures in the engine housing. We're pushing too hard." "How long until complete failure?" Ben asked. "Maybe 6 hours at this speed, maybe less." Ben looked at the navigation display. At their current speed, they would reach Nexus Prime in 4 hours. "Keep pushing, Tony. We'll worry about the engines after we save some lives." This was the difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy. When alien ships detected stress fractures, they slowed down and made repairs. When human ships detected stress fractures, they pushed harder and hoped the engines would hold together long enough to finish the job. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Patricia Moore was preparing for something no alien doctor would ever consider. She was loading syringes with combat stimulants that would boost human reflexes and strength by 40%. The side effects included possible heart failure, liver damage, and permanent nerve damage. Most species would call it poison. Humans called it standard combat preparation. "Doc?" asked Marine Lieutenant Kate Phillips, rolling up her sleeve for the injection. "What are our chances of surviving this stuff?" Dr. Moore didn't lie to her patients. "The stimulants have a 15% chance of causing serious complications. The mission has maybe a 5% chance of success. But without both, those people on Nexus Prime have 0% chance." Kate nodded and held still for the needle. Around her, 30 other Marines were making the same choice. They were about to inject themselves with chemicals that might kill them, so they could fight monsters that definitely would try to kill them, to save people they had never met. This was what other species called insane. Humans called it Tuesday. Meanwhile, in the ship's communications center, Jake Morrison was talking to the strangest passenger their fleet had ever carried. Kethra was a Zephyrian who had escaped Nexus Prime in a damaged cargo ship just hours before the human fleet arrived at Kepler Station. Kethra looked like a tall, thin person covered in blue-green scales, with large eyes that changed color with emotion. Right now, those eyes were bright orange with fear as the alien tried to explain what the humans were flying toward. "You do not understand?" Kethra said in careful English. "The harvesters are not just machines. They learn. They adapt. They take the knowledge of every species they consume and use it to become stronger. So they're smart," Jake said. "We figured that much." Kethra's eyes flashed red with frustration. "No, you do not understand. They have consumed 3 entire civilizations. They know everything those species knew about war, about technology, about survival. They will study you and find your weaknesses within hours." Jake thought about this. What if we don't give them time to study us? "What do you mean?" What if we hit them so hard and so fast that they don't get a chance to figure us out?" Kethra stared at him. In Zephyrian culture, war was a careful dance of move and counter-move, strategy and counter-strategy. The idea of simply attacking without a plan was completely alien to them. That would be suicide," Kethra finally said. "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But it might work." On the bridge, Captain Rodriguez was having a similar conversation with his tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. She was showing him computer models of harvester technology based on Kethra's testimony. "Sir, these things are built to counter every known form of galactic warfare," Sarah said. "Energy weapons, projectile weapons, electronic warfare, biological weapons. They have defenses for everything." "What about things they haven't seen before?" Ben asked. Sarah looked confused. "Like what?" Ben smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Like human stupidity." He called up the ship's database and pulled up a file marked Deathworld Protocols. Most of the galactic community knew that humans came from a dangerous planet. What they didn't know was that humans had turned that danger into doctrine. Deathworld protocols were military tactics that no sane species would ever use. They involved accepting massive casualties, using untested weapons, and performing maneuvers that had equal chances of destroying the enemy or destroying yourself. "Sir," Sarah said, reading through the file, "these tactics have casualty estimates of 60 to 80%. "For normal enemies," Ben replied. "But the harvesters aren't normal enemies. They're used to fighting species that value their own lives. They're not used to fighting species that are willing to die to protect strangers." In the cargo bay, Marine Commander Kate Phillips was briefing her assault teams. The Marines sat on metal benches, checking weapons that other species would consider too dangerous to use. Human military doctrine was simple. If it could kill the enemy and you were willing to use it, then it was a valid weapon. "Listen up," Kate said. We're going into a combat zone where the walls will try to eat us, the air will try to convert us into spare parts, and the enemy adapts to our tactics in real time. One of the younger Marines, Private Danny Clark, raised his hand. Ma'am, what's our plan? Kate grinned. We're going to hit them with everything we've got, and when that stops working, we're going to hit them with things we just made up. This was human military thinking in a nutshell. Other species spent years developing perfect battle plans. Humans made it up as they went along and relied on aggression and creativity to see them through. The first test of human unpredictability came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a Harvester scout ship investigating the human fleet. The alien vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of the largest human ship. Most species would have tried to avoid detection or opened diplomatic communications. Captain Rodriguez ordered a direct attack. Sir, Lieutenant Martinez said, that ship outguns us by at least 20 to 1. Good, Ben replied. They won't expect us to attack. The Harvester ship detected the incoming human fleet and immediately began scanning them. Its artificial intelligence started building tactical profiles based on observed human technology and behavior. It calculated optimal defensive positions and prepared countermeasures for expected attack patterns. It did not expect the humans to ram it. The UES Defiance accelerated directly toward the Harvester ship, while Chief Engineer Tony Walsh overloaded every system on the vessel. Warning alarms screamed as the engine temperature climbed past safe levels. The hull groaned as structural support strained beyond design limits. Tony, how long until the engines explode? Ben asked calmly. About 30 seconds, sir. Perfect timing. The Harvester ship tried to adapt its defenses, but its programming couldn't process what it was seeing. The human vessel was deliberately destroying itself in an attack that made no tactical sense. No species in the Harvester database had ever used suicide attacks as an opening move. The UES Defiance struck the alien ship at full speed, just as Tony Walsh detonated the overloaded engines. The explosion tore through both vessels, destroying the Harvester scout and crippling the human ship. But 3 other human vessels had used the explosion as cover to get close to the alien ship. They fired every weapon they had into the wreckage, making sure the Harvester was completely destroyed. Captain Rodriguez died in the collision along with half his crew. But they had achieved something that no other species had managed. They had destroyed a Harvester ship without losing their entire fleet. Lieutenant Martinez, now in command of what was left of the Defiance, opened communications to the rest of the human fleet. This is Acting Captain Martinez, she said. The enemy scout is destroyed. We've lost propulsion and most of our weapons, but we're still in the fight. From the fleet flagship, Commander Lisa Carter responded. Understood, Sarah. You've shown us the way, now let's go save those people. As the human fleet approached Nexus Prime, Kethra watched the tactical displays with amazement. The humans had just performed a maneuver that should have resulted in complete defeat. Instead, they had won their first victory against an enemy that had never been defeated. Your species is insane, Kethra told Jake Morrison. Yeah, Jake agreed, but we're insane in a way that works. On the view screen, Nexus Prime appeared as a brown and gray sphere covered in geometric patterns. The beautiful blue-green world that Kethra remembered was being transformed into something mechanical and horrible. But the humans were coming anyway, flying damaged ships with overloaded weapons toward an enemy they couldn't defeat by any reasonable measure. Sometimes Kethra thought reasonable was overrated. The human fleet arrived at Nexus Prime to find a world dying in the most horrible way possible. What had once been a beautiful planet covered in blue oceans and green forests was now a patchwork of metal and machinery. Geometric patterns spread across the surface like a disease, converting everything organic into raw materials for the Harvester factories. Commander Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the tactical display with growing horror. 3/4 of the planet was already transformed. Massive spires of twisted metal reached up from the surface, launching construction drones that worked to convert the remaining wilderness into more factory space. "Ma'am," said Communications Officer Jake Morrison, "I'm picking up weak transmissions from the northern polar region. The survivors are underground." Lisa studied the scanner readings. Deep beneath the ice caps, thermal signatures showed large caverns where the remaining Zephyrians had taken shelter. Energy readings suggested they had some kind of defensive barriers, but those barriers were failing. "How long do they have?" she asked. Jake ran the numbers through his computer. Maybe 6 hours before the barriers collapsed completely. After that, he didn't need to finish. After that, the harvesters would convert the last 12 million Zephyrians into building materials. "Options?" Lisa asked her staff. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster, the fleet's senior Marine officer, spoke first. "We could try a standard evacuation, get our transport ships down to the surface, load up as many people as possible, and run." "How many could we save?" Lisa asked. Amy checked her calculations. "Maybe 50,000? If we're lucky and nothing goes wrong." Lisa felt sick. 50,000 saved out of 12 million. It was better than nothing, but not much better. "Other options?" Chief Engineer Tony Walsh cleared his throat. "We could try to take out their central processing facility. If we can damage their command structure, maybe we can slow them down long enough to evacuate more people." "What would that require?" Tony pulled up a detailed scan of the largest harvester spire. It was easily 50 miles tall and 20 miles wide at the base, covered in defensive weapons that could destroy ships from orbit. "Someone would have to get inside that thing and plant explosives at the central core," Tony said. "It would be a one-way trip." Lisa looked around the room at her officers. These people had volunteered to come out here knowing it was probably suicide. Now she was asking them to definitely make it suicide. "I'll do it," said Amy Foster without hesitation. "Amy, you have a family back on Earth," Lisa reminded her. "So do those people down there," Amy replied, pointing at the planet below. "The difference is my family is safe. Theirs won't be unless someone stops this." Lisa made the decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Do it. Amy, take your best people and hit that facility. The rest of us will provide cover and evacuate as many civilians as we can." 2 hours later, Amy Foster was strapped into a drop pod that was basically a metal coffin with rockets attached. Around her, 20 other Marines were making final preparations for a mission that military textbooks would call impossible. "Remember," Amy said over the communication system, "we're not trying to win this fight. We're trying to buy time for the evacuation ships. Get in, plant the charges, and get out if you can." Private Danny Clark, barely 20 years old and scared, out of his mind, asked, "Ma'am, what if we can't get out?" Amy looked at him seriously. "Then we make sure our deaths count for something." The drop pods launched from the human ships like bullets fired at a target. They screamed through the atmosphere, at speeds that would have killed most alien species from the acceleration alone. Humans had evolved on a world with strong gravity, and their bodies could handle forces that would turn other species into jelly. The harvester defenses opened fire immediately. Beams of energy and clouds of mechanical drones rose from the surface to intercept the incoming pods. 3 pods were destroyed before they even reached the atmosphere. 2 more exploded during the descent. Amy's pod slammed into the surface of Nexus Prime so hard that she felt her teeth rattle. The crash systems kept her alive, but just barely. She kicked open the pod door and rolled out onto a surface that was no longer truly a planet. The ground beneath her feet was made of processed metal formed into hexagonal patterns. The air shimmered with tiny machines that immediately began trying to analyze her biology. Her environmental suit's filters worked overtime to keep the nanoscale harvesters from getting into her lungs. "Sound off," she called over the radio. "Who? Made it down alive?" 15 voices responded. Out of 21 Marines, they had lost 6 just getting to the surface. The odds were getting worse by the minute. The harvester facility loomed above them like a mechanical mountain. Its walls were covered in sensors and weapons that tracked their every movement. As they approached, the structure began adapting its defenses specifically for human-sized targets. "It's learning about us," observed Sergeant Mike Torres, watching. "Gun turrets reshape themselves to better target human anatomy. Then we better teach it something it won't like," Amy replied. The Marines began their assault on the facility using tactics that no other species would have considered. Instead of trying to avoid the defenses, they ran straight at them. Instead, Of using careful, coordinated attacks, they spread out and attacked from random directions. The Harvester artificial intelligence struggled to process their behavior. Its programming was designed to counter logical military tactics, not whatever this was. Private Danny Clark found himself face to face with a mechanical spider the size of a car. The thing had too many legs and weapons that could probably cut him in half. Instead of running or taking cover, Danny did something the machine didn't expect. He laughed. "You know what, you ugly piece of scrap?" Danny said, pulling out a grenade. "I've been scared of spiders my whole life. Thanks for giving me a chance to blow one up." He threw the grenade and dove to the side as the explosion turned the mechanical spider into flying metal pieces. The Harvester facility tried to process this behavior pattern and failed completely. Meanwhile, Amy Foster and her demolitions expert, Corporal Lisa Park, were fighting their way through corridors that actively tried to kill them. The walls sprouted spikes and energy weapons. The floor tried to grab their feet with mechanical tendrils. The ceiling dripped acid designed to dissolve human tissue. "This is like the worst horror movie ever made," Lisa Park said, setting up explosive charges while dodging attacks from the facility itself. "Yeah, but in the movies the heroes usually die," Amy replied, shooting a maintenance drone that was trying to repair the damage they were causing. They fought their way deeper into the facility, past rooms full of machinery that was processing, captured Zephyrians into raw materials. Amy tried not to look too closely at what the machines were doing. She needed to stay focused on the mission. At the center of the facility, they found something that changed everything. The Harvester Central Processor wasn't just a computer. It was a vast collection chamber where the knowledge and memories of consumed species were stored and analyzed. Amy realized they weren't just fighting machines. They were fighting the accumulated knowledge of every civilization the Harvesters had destroyed. The enemy knew everything those species had known about warfare, technology, and survival. But there was something the destroyed civilizations had never taught them. They had never taught them about humans. "Lisa, how much explosive do we have left?" Amy asked. "Enough to level this whole section, but we won't survive the blast." Amy looked around at the vast chamber full of stolen memories and stolen lives, all the species that had been consumed by these machines, all the knowledge that had been perverted into tools of destruction. "Set the charges for manual detonation," she ordered. "Ma'am, that means—" "I know what it means, Corporal. Do it anyway." As Lisa Park armed the explosives, Amy got on the radio to the evacuation ships. "This is Colonel Foster to all human vessels. We're in position, but someone needs to stay behind to trigger the charges manually." Commander Carter's voice came back. "Immediately." "Amy, there has to be another way. There isn't time to rig a remote detonator, and the Harvesters are adapting to our presence. In another hour, they'll have countermeasures for everything we're doing." Amy looked at her remaining Marines. Danny Clark was there, bleeding from a dozen small cuts but still ready to fight. So were 8 others, all of them understanding what she was asking. "I'll stay," Danny said quietly. "No," Amy replied. "This is my call to make. Everyone else gets out of here. That's an order." The other Marines began moving toward the exit, but they moved slowly, unwillingly. They didn't want to leave their commander behind. "Colonel," Danny Clark said over the radio as his squad reached the facility entrance, "it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor's mine, soldier. Now get those people to safety." Amy Foster stood alone in the heart of the Harvester facility, surrounded by the mechanical corpses of civilizations that had tried to fight logically and failed. She thought about her family back on Earth, about the Zephyrian children in the underground shelters, about the human fleet fighting impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. She pressed the detonator. The explosion could be seen from orbit. The explosion from Amy Foster's sacrifice lit up half the planet, but the celebration was short-lived. Within minutes of the blast, the Harvester factories began rebuilding themselves. Worse, they were building new defenses specifically designed to counter human tactics. Commander Lisa Carter watched the tactical display with growing alarm as new weapon systems emerged from the rubble of the destroyed facility. These weren't the standard Harvester designs they had been fighting. These looked different, cruder, but somehow more dangerous. "They're adapting," said Chief Engineer Tony Walsh grimly. "Look at these new gun turrets. They're designed to track erratic movement patterns. They're learning from how our Marines fought." Jake Morrison picked up alien transmissions from the planet's surface. When he decoded them, what he heard made his blood run cold. The mechanical voices were speaking in English, using human military terms and tactical concepts. "Commander," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly, "they're not just adapting to our technology. They're studying our psychology. They're learning to think like us." As if to prove his point, the Harvester defenses began broadcasting on human frequencies. But instead of mechanical voices, they played recordings of human screams. They projected holographic images of wounded Marines calling for help. They used every piece of data they had gathered about human emotional responses to create psychological warfare designed specifically for human minds. For most species, this would have been devastating. The careful, logical alien military minds would have been paralyzed by such targeted manipulation. The humans got angry. Colonel Frank Hayes, Amy Foster's replacement and a man who had been fighting wars since he was 18 years old, listened to the fake distress calls for exactly 30 seconds before he started swearing in 3 languages. "Those metal bastards think they can mess with our heads," he growled over the communication system. "Well, let me tell you something about humans. We invented psychological warfare. We've been scaring each other with stories around campfires since we lived in caves." Frank opened a channel to all Marine units still fighting on the planet's surface. "Listen up, people. The enemy wants to play mind games. Fine. Let's show them what human mind games look like." What followed became known in military history as the Spite Protocol, though it was never officially documented because most of it violated several interstellar warfare conventions. The Marines began using the Harvester psychological attacks against them. When the machines projected images of wounded humans, the Marines started projecting images of destroyed Harvesters. When the machines broadcast human screams, the Marines responded by broadcasting human war songs at maximum volume. Private Danny Clark, who had survived the facility assault and was now leading a squad of 6 Marines, came up with the most effective counter tactic. When Harvester drones tried to intimidate his team by shape-shifting into human-looking forms, Danny started talking to them. "Oh, that's a good try," he said to a mechanical drone that had formed itself to look like a human soldier. "But you got the uniform wrong. And humans don't walk that stiffly. Also, real humans would have told you to go screw yourself by now." The drone paused, confused by this response. Its programming had expected fear or confusion, not helpful criticism. "Here, let me show you," Danny continued, then demonstrated the proper way for a human to tell an enemy exactly what they thought of them. The demonstration involved several hand gestures that weren't in any Harvester database. The confusion this caused in the Harvester network was significant enough to slow their response time across an entire sector of the battlefield. Meanwhile, in the underground shelters, human technician Greg Martin was working with Zephyrian scientist Vel Khanna to study Harvester technology. What they found gave them the first real hope since the battle began. "Look at this," Greg said, pointing to a captured Harvester drone. "They're incredibly advanced, but they're also incredibly connected. Every unit communicates constantly with every other unit." Vel Khanna, whose scales had turned a worried purple color, understood immediately. "If they must share information to maintain their effectiveness, then we can use that against them," Greg finished. "We can't beat them with firepower, but maybe we can beat them with information warfare." They began working on a virus, not a biological one, but a computer virus designed specifically for the Harvester network. The plan was simple in concept, but nearly impossible to execute. They would feed false information into the network, creating conflicting orders and contradictory tactical data. But someone would have to get close enough to a major Harvester node to upload the virus directly, and whoever did it would have to survive long enough for the virus to spread through the entire network. Above the planet, the space battle was not going well for the humans. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, Ben's sister who now commanded the fighter squadron, was down to 6 ships from her original 12. The Harvesters had adapted to human flight patterns and were using predictive algorithms to anticipate their attack runs. "They're reading us like a book," she reported to Commander Carter. Every time we try a new approach, they counter it within minutes. Lisa studied the tactical display, watching the mechanical precision of the Harvester fleet movements. They were efficient, logical, and completely predictable in their efficiency. Sarah, what if you stopped being predictable? Ma'am? I mean completely unpredictable. Don't follow any flight patterns at all. Make it up as you go along. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering this. Human pilots trained for years to fly, efficiently and safely. What Lisa was asking her to do went against everything she had learned. That's completely insane, Commander. Yes, it is. Will it work? Sarah looked at her remaining pilots, all of them exhausted, running on stimulants, in pure determination. They had followed her this far into hell. Maybe they would follow her a little further. All right, people, she announced to her squadron. New flight plan. We're going to fly like drunk teenagers who just stole their parents' cars. What followed was the most chaotic space battle in recorded history. Human fighters performed maneuvers that made no tactical sense, attacked from angles that offered no advantages, and used weapon combinations that violated basic principles of space combat. The Harvester fleet, designed to counter logical military tactics, couldn't process what it was seeing. Their predictive algorithms crashed trying to calculate flight paths for pilots who were making decisions at random. Sarah found herself laughing as she dove her fighter directly at a Harvester cruiser, fired all her missiles at once, then used the explosion to slingshot around an asteroid at an angle that should have torn her ship apart. This is either brilliant or we're all going to die, called her wingman, Lieutenant Tom Baker, as he performed a barrel roll that served no purpose except to confuse the enemy targeting computers. Why not both? Sarah replied, pulling out a dive that brought her so close to the planet's surface that her ship's hull scraped the upper atmosphere. Down on the surface, Colonel Hayes was implementing his own version of controlled chaos. Instead of trying to outfight the Harvesters, his Marines were trying to outconfuse them. They set up fake radio transmissions with made-up military terms. They left behind equipment that looked important, but actually did nothing. They started fights with Harvester units, then retreated in random directions for no apparent reason. Sir, asked Sergeant Mike Torres, what exactly is our strategy here? Hayes grinned as he watched a group of Harvester drones spend 10 minutes trying to analyze a broken coffee maker that the Marines had left behind. Our strategy, Sergeant, is to be so completely unpredictable that the enemy AI gives itself a nervous breakdown trying to figure out what we're doing. In the underground shelters, Greg Martin and Velcana completed their virus program. It was ugly code, full of contradictions and impossible instructions, but that was the point. It was designed to spread through the Harvester network like digital cancer, creating errors and confusion wherever it went. It's ready, Greg announced, but someone still has to get close enough to a command node to upload it. Colonel Hayes volunteered immediately. My people will get you there. Frank, Commander Carter said over the communication system, that's another suicide mission. Maybe, Hayes replied, but if it works, it'll be worth it. Besides, after today, I think suicide missions are becoming a human specialty. As the human forces prepared for their most desperate gambit yet, the Harvesters continued to adapt and evolve. But for the first time since the battle began, they were adapting to something they couldn't understand. They were trying to outthink a species that had stopped thinking logically and started thinking creatively. And creativity, it turned out, was much harder to counter than logic. The final assault on the Harvester Command Center began at dawn, though on Nexus Prime, dawn was just a slightly brighter shade of mechanical gray. Colonel Frank Hayes led the last 30 human Marines across a landscape that looked like the inside of a giant machine, while overhead, Captain Sarah Rodriguez's remaining fighters provided cover against increasingly desperate Harvester air defenses. Greg Martin carried the virus program in a hardened data storage device strapped to his chest. The plan was simple. Get him close enough to a command node to upload the virus, then hope it spread through the Harvester network fast enough to matter. The reality was much more complicated. The Harvesters had learned from every human attack, so far. They had studied human psychology, human tactics, and human technology. Now they were putting all that knowledge to use in one final, overwhelming defense of their central command structure. The command spire was even bigger than the facility Amy Foster had destroyed, rising 60 miles into the sky like a metallic mountain. Its surface was covered with weapons that tracked every human movement, and the air around it swarmed with defensive drones. But the harvesters had made one crucial mistake in all their learning and adapting. They still thought like machines, trying to find the most efficient solution to the problem of human resistance. Humans weren't efficient. Humans were stubborn. "All right, people," Frank said over the radio as they approached the spire. "This is it. We get Greg to that command node, or 12 million people die. Anyone who wants to back out can do it now, no questions asked." Nobody moved. Frank nodded, not surprised. He had been fighting alongside humans for most of his adult life, and he knew what they were capable of when someone needed help. "Then let's go save some lives." The attack began with every human unit hitting the harvester defenses at the same time. Marines assaulted ground-level entrances while fighter pilots strafed weapon emplacements from above. Transport ships, their evacuation mission temporarily forgotten, used their cargo ramps as improvised assault platforms. The harvesters responded with overwhelming firepower, but they made their attacks predictable, efficient, and logical. The humans responded with chaos, creativity, and complete disregard for their own safety. Private Danny Clark, now a squad leader despite being barely 20 years old, led his team in an attack that military historians would later classify as either brilliant or insane. They used explosives to collapse a section of the spire's outer wall, then climbed the rubble while under fire from a dozen different weapon systems. "Danny, this is crazy even for us," shouted Corporal Lisa Park as energy beams cut through the air around them. "I know," Danny replied cheerfully, throwing a grenade at a gun turret that was shooting at them. "Isn't it great?" Meanwhile, Sarah Rodriguez was flying her fighter through the spire's defensive grid in a pattern that made no sense to anyone, including herself. She was down to her last two wingmen, both of them flying ships held together by emergency repairs and prayer. "Sarah, I'm reading massive structural damage to your left engine," warned Lieutenant Tom Baker over the radio. "Which one?" Sarah asked, checking her instruments. "Half of them weren't working anymore." "Both of them, actually," Sarah laughed, a sound that was equal parts humor and hysteria. "Well, that explains why the ship feels so sluggish." She aimed her crippled fighter at a cluster of harvester air defenses and fired everything she had left. The resulting explosion took out 3 enemy gun positions and sent her ship spinning toward the ground in a barely controlled crash. Inside the spire, Colonel Hayes and his team were fighting their way through corridors that were actively trying to kill them. The walls shot energy beams, the floors tried to grab their feet, and the ceiling dripped acid. But they kept moving forward because Greg Martin needed to reach that command node. They had started with 30 Marines. Now they were down to 15, then 10, then 5. "Greg, how much further?" Frank asked, pausing to shoot a mechanical spider that was trying to eat Sergeant Torres. Greg checked his scanner. 2 more levels up, then about 100 meters to the central processor. Frank looked at his remaining Marines. They were exhausted, wounded, and running low on ammunition, but they were still moving forward. "You heard him, people. 2 more levels." They reached the command center just as the virus program finished analyzing the harvester network. What Greg and Velkana had created wasn't just a computer virus. It was a digital representation of human thinking patterns, designed to spread chaos and confusion through a system built for perfect order. The command node was a massive crystal structure that pulsed with data flowing through the entire harvester collective. To upload the virus, Greg would have to physically connect to the crystal, which meant standing in the middle of the most heavily defended room on the planet. "Cover me," Greg said, pulling out his data cable. The remaining Marines formed a circle around him and started shooting at everything that moved. Frank Hayes stood directly behind Greg, using his own body as a shield while the technician worked to connect his equipment to the alien system. "How long do you need?" Frank shouted over the sound of gunfire. 30 seconds to establish connection, then another minute for full upload," Greg replied, his hands steady despite the chaos around. In 30 seconds had never felt so long. Harvester security systems swarmed toward them from every direction. Mechanical spiders dropped from the ceiling. Gun turrets rose from the floor. Energy weapons fired from hidden panels in the walls. The Marines held their ground because that's what Marines do. They stood between the civilians and the monsters, no matter what the cost. Sergeant Torres fell first, cut down by an energy beam while protecting Greg's left side. Corporal Martinez was next, crushed by a mechanical claw that she managed to damage with her last grenade. One by one, the Marines gave their lives to buy Greg the time he needed. "Upload complete," Greg announced just as the last Marine besides Frank fell to enemy fire. "Will it work?" Frank asked, reloading his weapon with his last ammunition clip. "I don't know," Greg admitted, "but if it does, every harvester in the galaxy is about to learn what it's like to think like a human." The virus spread through the harvester network like wildfire. Suddenly, the perfect mechanical coordination that had made the harvesters so dangerous began to break down. Units started receiving contradictory orders. Attack patterns became chaotic. Repair systems began fixing things that weren't broken and breaking things that worked fine. The harvesters had built their entire civilization on the principle of perfect efficiency. The virus forced them to be inefficient, to make mistakes, to second-guess their own decisions. For a machine intelligence, it was like a mental breakdown. Frank and Greg fought their way out of the command center as the entire spire began to shake. The virus wasn't just confusing the harvesters, it was making them fight each other. Outside, the surviving humans watched in amazement as harvester factories began dismantling themselves. Construction drones started deconstructing the very structures they had been building. The geometric patterns covering the planet's surface began to dissolve as the machines that had created them received conflicting orders about what they were supposed to be doing. Commander Lisa Carter, coordinating the evacuation from orbit, couldn't believe what she was seeing on her tactical display. "Jake, are you reading this? The entire harvester fleet is attacking itself." Jake Morrison stared at his instruments in wonder. The virus worked. Greg's program is spreading through their whole network. They're receiving human thought patterns and it's driving them crazy. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Of the 2,000 humans who had come to save Nexus Prime, fewer than 300 were still alive. The UES Defiance was gone. Most of the Marine units had been wiped out. The fighter squadrons were reduced to a handful of damaged ships, yet they had done something that every advanced civilization in the galaxy had said was impossible. They had defeated the Harvesters. In the underground shelters, 8 million Zephyrians emerged to find their world scarred but free. The mechanical plague was destroying itself in a cascade of confusion and contradictory programming. Velkana approached Commander Carter as the evacuation ships began landing to help with reconstruction efforts. "Your species paid a terrible price for our freedom," the Zephyrian scientist said, her scales showing colors of deep gratitude and sorrow. Lisa looked out at the smoking ruins of what had been a beautiful world, thinking about all the friends she had lost in the battle. "That's what humans do," she said simply. "We show up when nobody else will. We fight when the fight seems impossible. We pay the price so others don't have to." 3 months later, Jake Morrison was back at Kepler Station when the first response to their victory message arrived. It came from the Altarian High Command, the same government that had written off Nexus Prime as a lost cause. "The Galactic Council wishes to formally recognize humanity's actions at Nexus Prime," the message read. "Your species has demonstrated capabilities that we previously thought impossible. We would like to discuss humanity's role in galactic defense initiatives." Jake forwarded the message to Admiral Carter, who is now in charge of all human military operations in this sector of space. Her response was typically human.